that Yemen is, home to the world's worst humanitarian crisis, but that still has not made it a true priority for the international community, especially since it seems they've managed to limit the spillover. So where does Yemen actually fall now with this humanitarian crisis on the international community's list of need?
Well, that's a really important question that you've raised, because one of the reasons why this war keeps dragging on, there are many reasons, but one of them is that it's just not getting the high priority, sustained international interest to try to figure out sustained solutions. It's a question of, okay, things get really bad, we throw some aid money at it and hope that this assuages our consciences. But there are several reasons for why it's not really going any further. Firstly, it's very complicated. It's a very complicated war. It's not easy to identify good guys and bad guys. There are no quick wins. There's no easy to follow storyline. And it doesn't have significant oil resources. And we're not seeing Yemenis show up in places like Europe, unlike the Syrian crisis. So there are lots of displaced people, lots of displaced Yemenis, 4 million of them, but they're inside Yemen. And
Right.
meanwhile, the international community just sort of tiptoes around the agendas of its regional allies, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. And so other more urgent priorities keep taking over. There's China and trade, there's Iran and the nuclear talks, there's the
Right.
jihad moving to Africa, there's other humanitarian crises like in Tigray, now Afghanistan. So Yemen just keeps getting shunted off the agenda.
And as you were saying, I mean, Elizabeth, nobody wants to have, their hands dirtied by potentially taking the wrong side in this conflict. But in the meantime, there is one clearly identifiable wrong side that is actually very rarely addressed now, unfortunately, and that is the forces of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the local Daesh affiliate in the south of Yemen. If the international community kind of wants to stay out of this, are they, in essence, allowing a breeding ground to further build for these organizations that are internationally a threat to everybody?
Well, there are a couple of issues to unpack there. First of all, definitely, if the war is allowed to drag on, if the kinds of meetings that are happening on the sidelines are not a lot more inclusive, then yes, we are going to have a continuing breeding ground for militants, jihadi, terrorist activities. But the second issue is that the groups you've just mentioned, Daesh and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, they are not the same groups that they were even 3 or 4 years ago. These groups have changed. They've come under a lot of pressure. So what's happened is that they've started to morph into other militias. They've started to blend into different mainstream militias. Different splinters have gone different ways and are being instrumentalized in the overall conflict. So just to sum up, it's now not at all easy to define what or who is a terrorist in Yemen. And that's making
Right.
everything a whole lot more complicated.